You are reading this message not by accident, not by coincidence, and not by idle curiosity. In every initiatory tradition, the first rule is simple but uncompromising. When the teaching appears, the student is ready. This does not mean the student feels ready, confident, or calm. More often, it means the opposite. It means the old ways of thinking are no longer sufficient, and the mind has begun to sense that something essential must change. The figure of Thoth never emerges during periods of comfort or complacency. He appears when certainty breaks down, when the mind becomes noisy, when fear multiplies thoughts faster than they can be resolved, and when the inner compass spins without a fixed direction. That inner turbulence is not a flaw. It is the signal. This is precisely why the first instruction is not mystical, poetic, or abstract. It is blunt and practical. Stop worrying. Worrying is not merely an emotion that happens to you. It is a habit of misdirected attention. Ancient initiates understood that thought itself is a force, not a decorative byproduct of consciousness. Every sustained thought consumes energy. When the mind loops endlessly around imagined futures, most of which never occur, it drains the very power required to act effectively in the present. Thoth, as an archetype, governs measure, rhythm, and proportion. His function is not to suppress chaos through force, but to dissolve it by restoring order to awareness. If your life feels unstable now, uncertain, or strangely disassembled, it is not because something has gone wrong. It is because a reordering process has begun, and disorder is temporarily visible while alignment is taking place. The initiate often misinterprets guidance as pressure. Sudden changes, unexpected delays, broken plans, or recurring symbols are quickly labeled as problems. In reality, they are recalibrations. Thoth's method is never loud. He does not shout commands or provide dramatic signs on demand. Instead, he removes what no longer fits. When something collapses without a clear explanation, a relationship, a role, a belief, a routine, it is usually because its structure could not support the next phase of development. Worrying arises when the ego resists this pruning, clinging to forms that have already served their purpose. Resistance creates suffering. Release creates clarity. The ancients warn that fear distorts perception. A fearful mind cannot read reality accurately. It sees warnings where there are signals, threats where there are adjustments, and endings where there are transitions. This is why the initiate is instructed to observe before reacting. The guidance operating in your life now is not pushing you forward blindly or demanding reckless action. It is aligning timing. Just as ancient scribes waited for precise astronomical moments before recording sacred events, your current pause serves a function. Silence is not emptiness. Stillness is not stagnation. Silence is preparation, and stillness is calibration. Understand this clearly. Guidance does not remove responsibility. It sharpens it. Thoth's influence does not carry you through life while you remain passive. It teaches you how to walk with awareness. When you stop worrying, mental clarity returns. When clarity returns, choices simplify. When choices simplify, confidence follows naturally. This sequence is not symbolic or philosophical, it is functional and observable. A calm mind does not guarantee success, but it dramatically increases accuracy. If you feel as though events are unfolding beyond your control, it is because control itself is being redefined. True mastery is not domination of outcomes or constant prediction of the future. True mastery is precision of response. The initiate learns to move in harmony with patterns rather than exhausting themselves by fighting them. This message is not asking for belief, faith, or emotional comfort. It is asking for discipline of thought. Stop worrying not because everything is guaranteed to work out in the way you imagine, but because worrying clouds the very intelligence that is guiding you. The moment unnecessary fear quiets, something subtle but unmistakable occurs. Decisions feel lighter. Intuition sharpens. The present moment becomes sufficient. That shift quiet, steady, and grounded is the first clear sign that guidance has already begun operating within you. To understand how Thoth guides, one must abandon the modern fantasy that order always looks calm, smooth, or reassuring. This fantasy is a product of convenience, not wisdom. In reality, order often announces itself through disruption. Ancient scribes and initiates observed a consistent pattern. Before balance is restored, imbalance intensifies. This is not failure, regression, or punishment, it is exposure. Hidden weaknesses must surface before they can be corrected. Structures that appear stable only because they have never been tested will always collapse when real alignment begins. What you experience as chaos is often information arriving faster than an untrained mind can organize it. Worrying emerges precisely at this point. The mind attempts to process everything simultaneously, treating all signals as equally urgent. But intelligence does not operate through accumulation, it operates through prioritization. Thoth's domain is not the hoarding of information, but discernment. He governs what is recorded, what is ignored, and what is permanently discarded. In your life now, unnecessary elements, habits, relationships, goals, beliefs are surfacing not to torment you, but to be released. The discomfort you feel is the friction of separation. Separation is not loss, it is refinement. Guidance rarely arrives as a detailed map with clear instructions and guaranteed outcomes. That expectation belongs to a mind that seeks comfort rather than clarity. Guidance arrives as constraints. Doors close without explanation. Options narrow unexpectedly. Time pressures appear where freedom once existed. These are not obstacles placed in your way. They are instructions encoded as limitation. When possibilities are infinite, paralysis follows. When possibilities reduce, direction becomes visible. The initiate understands that limitation is not a punishment, it is a focusing mechanism. Precision requires boundaries. This is why you are told to stop worrying. Worrying assumes randomness. It assumes that events are disconnected, meaningless, or hostile. Guidance, however, operates through pattern recognition. When similar challenges repeat in your life, they are not signs of bad luck or personal failure. They are unresolved lessons requesting completion. Each repetition refines your response. At first, you react emotionally. Later, you hesitate. Eventually, you respond with precision. Over time, emotional charge decreases while effectiveness increases. This process is not mystical. It is cognitive training conducted through lived experience. Order also requires rhythm. There are cycles of expansion and contraction, movement and stillness. Many initiates fail not because they lack intelligence, but because they attempt continuous action. They mistake constant motion for progress. Thoth's influence often manifests as enforced pauses, delays that feel frustrating, inconvenient, or even threatening to one's sense of momentum. Yet these pauses prevent costly errors. They protect you from acting with incomplete information. If progress feels slow now, it is because accuracy is being prioritized over speed. Precision always looks inefficient to an impatient mind. Pay attention to where your attention is being redirected. Old interests lose intensity. Ambitions that once felt urgent now feel hollow. Certain conversations drain energy instead of generating insight. Solitude becomes more attractive, not because you are withdrawing from life, but because noise is losing its appeal. These shifts are not signs of detachment or apathy. They are recalibrations of focus. The mind is being trained to listen before speaking, to observe before moving, to measure before committing. Worrying disrupts this training. It floods the internal system with noise, drowning out subtle signals. Under constant worrying, every decision feels dramatic, every delay feels dangerous, and every uncertainty feels personal. Calmness, by contrast, is not passivity or resignation. It is signal clarity. When the mind quiets, patterns become visible without effort. Decisions feel less heavy because they align with internal logic rather than external pressure or fear-driven urgency. This section carries a single operational instruction: trust the narrowing. When your path feels more defined, even if it feels less comfortable or less glamorous, you are closer to coherence. Comfort often belongs to misalignment because misalignment avoids friction. Alignment requires adjustment, and adjustment is rarely soothing at first. Guidance is not asking you to surrender intelligence or agency. It is sharpening both. Stop worrying not because uncertainty disappears, but because uncertainty is being organized into meaning. Chaos is not the opposite of order. It is the raw material from which order is extracted. The architecture is already forming beneath the surface. Your task is not to panic at the noise, but to remain attentive long enough to recognize the pattern as it reveals itself. Every initiatory system begins with mental discipline, not belief, not ritual, not external symbols discipline. Before the initiate is trusted with deeper insight, the mind itself must become a stable instrument. Thoth's role as keeper of measure and balance makes this unavoidable. Anything excessive is corrected. Excess emotion clouds judgment. Excess speculation fragments attention. Excess fear distorts perception. Worrying is the most common form of excess because it disguises itself as responsibility. In truth, it is imagination without direction, creative energy turned against its own source. The untrained mind treats every thought as urgent. Each idea demands reaction. Each possibility demands evaluation. Each fear demands reassurance. This creates a constant state of internal emergency. The trained mind operates differently. It evaluates relevance before engagement. It asks not is this thought loud, but is this thought useful? This distinction defines initiation. Guidance does not replace thinking, it refines it. When you feel mentally overwhelmed, it is not because you lack intelligence or capacity. It is because boundaries have not yet been enforced within thought itself. To stop worrying, you must first understand a simple but transformative principle. Not every thought deserves attention. Thoughts arise automatically. They are products of memory, conditioning, and pattern recognition. Engagement, however, is voluntary. Ancient teachings consistently emphasized that awareness, not thought, is the true locus of power. The moment you observe a whirring without feeding it, its energy diminishes. This is not suppression, denial, or repression. It is selection. You are choosing where mental energy is allocated, just as a scribe chooses which events are recorded and which are discarded. Mental order always mirrors external order. When thoughts align, actions follow naturally, without force. When thoughts scatter, effort multiplies without producing meaningful results. This is why you may feel busy yet unproductive, active yet unsatisfied. Thoth's guidance at this stage emphasizes internal governance. This often manifests as a growing intolerance for distractions, shallow conversations, or chaotic environments. What once felt tolerable now feels draining. This is not arrogance or withdrawal. It is refinement. The mind is learning to protect its bandwidth. You are being trained to think in structures rather than impulses, to recognize cause and effect rather than reacting to surface appearances, to separate fear from fact. This is why current challenges feel instructional rather than purely emotional. Each situation presents a silent question. Will you react or will you analyze? Reaction is immediate but costly. Analysis is slower but precise. The initiate learns that precision saves more energy than speed ever could. Worrying collapses time. It drags imagined futures into the present and forces you to carry them if they were real. This burdens action with fantasy and drains momentum. Guidance restores time to its proper sequence. Act now. Observe results. Adjust later. This loop action, observation, correction is efficient and sustainable. It builds clarity through experience rather than prediction. The initiate learns that clarity is not achieved by foreseeing every outcome, but by responding intelligently to feedback. Silence plays a critical role in this discipline. Not silence of speech alone, but silence of internal commentary. The constant narration inside the mind prevents integration. Moments of stillness allow subconscious synthesis to occur. Patterns connect. Insights form. Many solutions appear only after worrying subsides, because the mind finally has space to organize information. This is why breakthroughs often happen during rest, walks, or quiet reflection, when effort temporarily ceases. It is essential to understand that guidance does not demand perfection. Perfection is static and unrealistic. Guidance demands attentiveness. Mistakes are permitted. Unconscious repetition is not. Each error teaches proportion. Each correction sharpens judgment. Over time, confidence emerges not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because competence has been cultivated through disciplined response. This phase of initiation may feel lonely. Mental discipline often separates the initiate from habitual reassurance and external validation. Old patterns of seeking comfort through agreement or distraction no longer satisfy, but independence of thought is the price of clarity. You are learning to stand on internal coherence rather than borrowed certainty. Stop worrying not because others will guide you, protect you, or remove uncertainty, but because you are learning to guide yourself accurately. When thought is governed, fear loses authority. When fear loses authority, intelligence regains its rightful place. Thoth does not communicate through emotion alone. He communicates through structure, symbol, and pattern. This is a critical distinction. Emotion is transient, subjective, and easily distorted. Symbols, by contrast, are stable carriers of meaning across time. Recurring numbers, repeated themes, familiar questions resurfacing in different forms, these are not mystical tricks, omens, or supernatural messages. They are cognitive markers. They indicate that the mind has entered a phase where perception is sharpening. Guidance works on perception first, long before it alters external circumstance. When alignment begins, the mind stops scanning reality randomly. It starts filtering. Patterns that were always present suddenly become visible, not because they have appeared, but because attention has become selective. This is why symbols often feel as though they are following you. In truth, they were always there. You simply lacked the internal structure to register them meaningfully. Synchronicity is frequently misunderstood as magic, fate, or intervention. In reality, it is the alignment between internal focus and external feedback. When your attention stabilizes around a specific theme, the environment begins to reflect that focus back to you through relevant information. Books, conversations, images, and situations begin to converge around similar ideas. This is not the universe bending to your will. It is your perception becoming coherent. When worrying dominates, attention scatters. When attention scatters, meaning fragments. This is why calm awareness always precedes meaningful coincidence. You may notice that certain ideas now appear repeatedly across different contexts. A concept mentioned in a book echoes in a conversation. A question you avoided reappears in another form. This is not obsession or fixation. It is filtration. The mind has selected a theme for integration. Thoth's role as scribe is instructive here. He does not record everything, only what matters. What repeats matters. Repetition is the mind's way of insisting that a lesson has not yet been fully integrated. This is why you were told to stop worrying. Worrying blocks interpretation. Fear-driven interpretation turns symbols into threats. A delay becomes failure. A repetition becomes punishment. A sign becomes a warning. Calm interpretation, by contrast, turns the same elements into instructions. The event itself does not change, the reading does. Guidance does not alter reality directly, it alters how reality is read. And how reality is read determines how it is navigated. Timing is an essential part of this language. Delays, interruptions, cancellations, and rescheduling often feel like irritations, because the ego prefers momentum over accuracy. Yet these moments frequently prevent misalignment. Acting too early, even with good intentions, wastes energy and creates complications that must later be undone. The initiate learns patience not as a moral virtue, but as a strategic necessity. Right action at the wrong time is still wrong action. Guidance often protects you by slowing you down. As alignment deepens, dreams may become more vivid. Thoughts may surface without obvious triggers. Memories, images, or insights may appear spontaneously. These are not predictions or prophecies, they are integration processes. When conscious noise decreases, the subconscious begins processing unresolved material. Guidance operates across all levels of cognition, not just rational planning. Ignoring this layer leads to repeated confusion. Acknowledging it allows coherence to form beneath awareness. It is important to understand what not to do. Do not chase signs. Chasing creates dependency. It trains the mind to look outward for permission rather than inward for clarity. When signs are chased, they lose informational value and become emotional crutches. Observation, by contrast, builds literacy. Literacy in symbols means recognizing patterns without emotional attachment. It means noticing repetition without demanding explanation. Over time, you learn which signals require action and which require contemplation. This discernment marks true initiation. The initiate does not react to every coincidence, nor dismiss them outright. They observe, record internally, and wait for pattern confirmation. Single events rarely instruct. Sequences do. Guidance speaks in systems, not in isolated moments. When a pattern stabilizes, action becomes obvious without force. Stop worrying, because worrying creates static. Static distorts signals. When the internal environment is quiet, the language of alignment becomes readable. You no longer feel overwhelmed by symbols, because you no longer interpret them emotionally. They become informational, useful, grounded. At this stage, guidance feels less dramatic and more precise. There are fewer grand revelations and more subtle corrections. Life does not become mysterious, it becomes legible. You begin to trust your capacity to read reality accurately, not because you believe everything has meaning, but because you can distinguish meaning from noise. That ability to read without fear, to observe without grasping, and to act without urgency is the true function of symbols and synchronicities. They are not there to impress you, they are there to train you. Trust is often misunderstood as passivity, surrender, or blind optimism. In everyday language, to trust is sometimes taken to mean letting go of effort and hoping for the best. In initiatory terms, however, trust has a very different meaning. Trust means acting without emotional distortion. It means engaging reality clearly, without fear exaggerating risks or desire inflating expectations. Thoth's guidance never removes accountability. It sharpens it. You remain responsible for your choices, your preparation, and your conduct, but you are released from the impossible burden of controlling every outcome. This distinction alone dissolves a vast amount of unnecessary anxiety. Worrying thrives on false responsibility. It assumes that if you think hard enough, anticipate enough scenarios, or rehearse enough fears, you can somehow manage variables that are inherently uncontrollable. Mature trust recognizes limits accurately. It assigns responsibility where it belongs. You are responsible for effort, not results. You are responsible for intention, not reaction. You are responsible for how you respond, not for how others behave. Once this division is accepted, mental energy returns. You stop leaking attention into imaginary futures and reclaim it for effective action in the present. This is why you are instructed to stop worrying. Worrying assumes total responsibility for everything that might go wrong. Trust assigns responsibility precisely. You control preparation. You control learning. You control response. You do not control timing, chance encounters, emotional states of others, or the full complexity of systems larger than yourself. Refusing to accept this boundary creates chronic tension. Accepting it restores balance. Energy that was once consumed by fear becomes available for clarity. As fear diminishes, decision-making improves in a noticeable way. You hesitate less, because fear no longer magnifies imagined consequences. At the same time, you rush less because urgency is no longer driven by anxiety. Balance emerges naturally. This balance is often mistaken for indifference, but it is not. It is precision. The initiate learns to commit fully to action without attaching identity to outcome. Success is welcomed. Failure is analyzed. Neither defines the self. This stage marks a significant shift in how outcomes are processed. Failures may still occur, sometimes unexpectedly. Guidance does not eliminate difficulty or guarantee favorable results. What it ensures is usefulness. Every outcome feeds competence. Success confirms alignment. Failure reveals adjustment points. Both are valuable. Over time, resilience replaces the need for reassurance. You no longer require constant confirmation from circumstances or others, because experience has taught you how to respond proportionally. This is where trust matures into something stable. You stop asking, "Will this work out?" and begin asking, "What does this teach me about alignment?" That shift changes everything. Fear loses its grip because learning is always available, regardless of outcome. Even disappointment becomes informational rather than personal. The mind stops dramatizing events and starts extracting insight. This stage often coincides with increased independence. External validation loses urgency. Praise no longer intoxicates, and criticism no longer destabilizes. Internal coherence becomes the reference point. Decisions are measured against alignment rather than approval. This can feel unsettling at first. The loss of external reassurance may feel like isolation. In reality, it is maturation. The initiate no longer borrows certainty from others. They generate it internally through disciplined attention and consistent action. Responsibility without fear also changes how risk is perceived. Risk no longer feels like danger to identity, but like a calculated variable. You learn to assess rather than avoid. Courage becomes quieter and more consistent. There is less dramatic confidence and more steady reliability. You act when action is required and wait when waiting is strategic. Trust, in this mature form, does not promise safety. It promises clarity. It does not guarantee success. It guarantees learning. This is why it is sustainable. A person who trusts in this way cannot be easily shaken by uncertainty, because uncertainty is no longer interpreted as threat. It is simply terrain. Stop worrying not because nothing can go wrong, but because worrying interferes with your ability to respond correctly when things do. Responsibility, accurately defined, is empowering. When fear is removed from it, responsibility becomes light enough to carry and strong enough to support decisive action. This is the mature form of trust: clear boundaries, precise responsibility, and steady engagement with reality as it is. The final instruction is integration. Integration is not a climax, a revelation, or a dramatic turning point. It is quieter than that. Guidance is not an event that arrives, changes everything, and then departs. It is a mode of operation that gradually becomes stable. Thoth's influence does not surge and fade. It consolidates. Once mental discipline, pattern recognition, and responsibility align, life does not become simpler in structure, but it becomes simpler in experience. Complexity remains, yet confusion fades. You no longer struggle to interpret what is happening. You understand how to engage with it. At this stage, worrying begins to feel obsolete. It does not disappear because life becomes predictable, but because worrying belongs to a previous operating system. It was once necessary when perception was fragmented and responsibility was misassigned. Now, it only adds friction. You are not abandoning caution or vigilance. You are upgrading clarity. Decisions feel quieter, not because they are trivial, but because they are aligned. Action feels cleaner, because it is no longer burdened by internal debate. Rest feels deserved, because effort is no longer wasted on imaginary outcomes. Integration changes your relationship with uncertainty. Uncertainty does not vanish, and it does not need to. What changes is its meaning. It no longer threatens identity or stability. It becomes terrain rather than danger. You understand that uncertainty is the natural environment of growth, not a sign of error. This is the mark of the initiate, the ability to move through the unknown without losing internal structure. You do not require guarantees to proceed. You require coherence. Living as a conscious instrument of order does not mean controlling life. It means participating in it accurately. You respond instead of reacting. You observe before intervening. You adjust rather than resist. This does not make life passive. It makes it efficient. Energy once spent on fear is now available for attention. Attention, when steady, becomes the most powerful organizing force available to the human mind. Integration also brings a subtle humility. You stop demanding that life confirm your expectations. You stop insisting that events justify themselves emotionally. Instead, you ask a more functional question. How do I respond to this in alignment with what I know? This question replaces the old ones, why is this happening to me? Or what if this goes wrong? And with that replacement, unnecessary suffering dissolves. Carrying this forward requires practice, not belief. Guard your attention deliberately. Attention is the gateway through which order enters experience. What you feed repeatedly will organize your perception. Respect timing. Acting too early creates resistance. Acting too late wastes opportunity. Timing is not mystical, it is situational awareness applied consistently. Record lessons mentally. Not every experience needs to be analyzed immediately, but none should be ignored. Reflection transforms experience into competence. Release what no longer fits without resentment. Misalignment often lingers because of attachment to outdated identities, goals, or narratives. Integration requires regular subtraction. What no longer serves clarity must be removed, even if it once had value. This is not loss, it is maintenance. Guidance continues as long as discipline remains. This is a crucial point. There is no permanent arrival state. Integration is dynamic. When discipline erodes, confusion returns. When attention scatters, signals blur. When responsibility is misassigned, fear resurfaces. But now, you recognize these shifts quickly. Correction becomes immediate rather than dramatic. You do not spiral, you recalibrate. This is why integration is stable. It depends on method. Method survives mood. Method survives uncertainty. Method survives fatigue. What you have learned is not a philosophy, it is an operating principle. The message is complete because the structure is complete. Nothing more needs to be added. What remains is application. The work does not end. It becomes quieter, more precise, and more your own.